Welcome to the one more episode of the World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman, as you can see, she is on the screen. She is a US-based national security and human rights lawyer, as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in the world, according to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Thank you so much, and I'm happy to be back again.
Thank you. Thank you. Several big topics today, Irina. A lot have happened in the last few days, 2 weeks. So let's take them one by one. This time, let's start with India. India US 2 plus 2 dialogue recently happened. Let's touch upon that.
Indeed, it has been so far the biggest and most important one out of the series that US and India have been conducting for the past several years. There are also other countries, and there are also new countries joining into this format, including UK. 2 plus 2 means essentially two counterparts from each country meeting to discuss foreign policy, defense relations, commerce, economy, and other issues. And this time, US and India touched on such important issues as critical minerals, cutting the exchange in cutting edge technologies that is actually progressing and moving forward. Cooperation on issues such as student visas for Indian nationals coming to the United States, and also issues related to Indo-Pacific security, as well as concerns and differences over matters such as India's relations with Russia and Indian-Russian defense relations, the arms situation, why India cannot simply drop it as a partner. So all of these things came to the surface, and it was a very fruitful and important discussion, and hopefully the next step will be the continuity of building on these relations, building on cooperation. And one of the most important outcomes from an economic perspective is the discussion of joint development, and not merely production or trade of various technologies and elements that we were talking about. So we are seeing more integrated levels of economic cooperation.
Right, right, Irina. This was the fifth, US India 2 plus 2 ministerial dialogue. So, where are we heading towards this sort of arrangement between the two countries? Are there challenges also, differences also that they have not been able to look towards a very intently, and that needs to be taken care of?
I think the biggest issue is the issue of trust building. I wouldn't say it's so much a challenge in the sense that it's, that there's some hostility that needs to overcome. It's the fact that the relationship has been building relatively recently, but at a very quick pace. So with certain issues, it's just a matter of time, and it's going to take time to build up these relations. For instance, in the area of security cooperation, in the area of arms trade, US obviously wants India to move away from dependency of Russian weapons. That's a critical issue, but the problem is, of course, India's relationship with Russia has been very long-standing, historic, and logistically speaking, it is not an easy thing to do because Russia actually controls some of the technologies that are critical to India's infrastructure. India has also been looking to develop its own industry. It has been diversifying its technologies, buying more from France, from Israel, and other countries. US will probably want to eventually transition into selling more of its technologies and more of its arms to India, but this is the trust part that I am talking about. I think this is the main obstacle to why those sales have not happened yet. I think it will take time before US is ready to sell some of its more advanced um, weapons to India. And of course, the question is whether the chicken or the egg should come first. Whether India should first move away from working with Russia, or whether US should first sell it its technologies. It's a complicated situation because, of course, there is concern about American weapons falling into the wrong hands. On the other hand, India cannot do without some of those critical weapons. So I think US is simply waiting until India gets enough weapons from other Western countries or other allied countries that it is no longer quite as dependent, and then US can complement them and start providing more advanced technologies. I think that is the main right now concern. There is also the fact that India in general is moving away economically from China, but it also takes time to decouple, just as it will take US to decouple, probably decades, not years. It's a matter of decades, but there is an interest in helping move that forward because India is becoming a very welcome destination for American industry, and there is hope that this business friendly environment will accelerate and become faster integrated with US businesses over time as well. Again, this is not so much an obstacle or challenge, but it's just also a matter of building up capacity and simply a matter of moving in the right direction over time.
Right, right, Rina. You see, India has a lot of these 2+2 ministerial dialogues, including Russia, Australia. We had just recently had that meeting. We already have
Mm-hmm.
one with Japan. We have got with the UK. So the world is moving more towards one-to-one talks, though in the 2+2 format, and rather than talking less at the international level. So, is it the norm that is going to be happening globally much more? And how does this is different than the other formats? It means the global all these big forums will actually there will be only much more for optics and less for actual talks. More talks will happen globally in this format. What is your understanding of this? I just want to understand, the way global diplomacy will move forward with this sort of dialogues.
Well, to be honest, I think we are going through phases. I think there are periods of time, and a lot of it depends on who is in power in any given country, particularly in the US, but also elsewhere. And there are different vast differences in preferences among administrations. The Obama administration was very much in favor of big format. The Trump administration was not. The Biden administration was very much initially in favor of big diplomacy, but the polarization and the various conflicts created a lot of differences in among even NATO countries, much less anyone else. There's been a building up of new alliances, and I think they discovered that logistically speaking, smaller groups of countries and bilateral relations just make it easier to work out individual differences and to come to arrangements that faster. However, it is inevitable that some forms of multilateral discussions will stay. The Quad, for instance, is a welcome format because you do need groups of countries coordinating among themselves against common threats and in favor of common problem solving. But of course, I think the future is kind of in smaller regional alliances rather than huge alliances. I don't think very big groups of countries talking together is efficient. I think there are too many divergent interests and problems and issues, and it's just very difficult to coordinate. So I think most likely the future is going to be a mixture of bilateral and small multilateral gatherings. Bilaterals to coordinate individual relations and to work out those separate conversations that you need to have privately one on one, and multilateral small multilateral to coordinate in a flexible format and the issues that are joint common interest, and they are going to be based on common interests more, and less on just strictly geographical locations, and all sorts of previous criteria that didn't really make much sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And now let's move on to the Gaza. What is happening there? Means I just read statements from both the parties, and both our parties we are reaching towards towards some sort of ceasefire or whatever they want to call it, some agreement about hostage release, Palestinians under even Israeli leadership and Hamas leadership. They both have come out with some positive statement about this. Then what was this all war about? What is that they have gotten now? What is it that they have achieved now after the loss of so many lives? What did this all this brinkmanship lead to this? Why couldn't they have talked to you from an outsider's perspective? Why couldn't they talk earlier on? What stops them to find a permanent solution to these things? Or is it after this again they will go back to fighting? That after these great talks and great statements, I want to understand for a lot of people in this part of the world wondering what is happening. Suddenly all this fight and suddenly all this talk of some breakthrough.
Well, first of all, I think Israel made it clear that the release of prisoners is not, is not going to put an end to the hostilities, because Israel's military goals have not been met yet. The rocket fire against stopped Israel's Iran proxies are still coordinating and attacking Israeli targets, and the Hamas leadership has not been eliminated. They've killed a number of commanders, and they've eliminated a lot of foot soldiers and infrastructure, but not nearly all of the tunnels, and not any of the leading heads of these operations and attacks. So that is bound to continue. This particular pause is only to give relief to some of the most vulnerable hostages, women and children. Um, Hamas has been playing games the entire time. Every day there's a new condition, and this 4-day pause will also, from their perspective, is a huge victory, because they will be, despite the fact that they abducted all these innocent people, they will still come out looking like heroes for releasing them and for getting some of their own people back. And their own people are all violent prisoners, including women and underage minors. They've all been convicted of crimes of terrorism. These are not innocent people that Israel abducted off the street in Gaza at all. These were people who tried to kill Israelis and tried to commit terrorist attacks. So Hamas will look great. They're counting on this to essentially gain even more support around the world. One of the conditions is a 4-day ceasefire, but Hamas has traditionally not been trusted with this at all, and it will also allow their leaders to relocate from their targeted areas of attack in the north to the south through the tunnels, and keep them from away from danger zone, and help them relocate among the IDPs and Gaza residents who reside in the south. Another issue is that this will allow one of the conditions was that Israel will bring 350 trucks of aid a day. Now, it seems like a noble gesture that a win-win for everyone involved. But let's recall what happened when Israel gave just a couple of trucks of fuel that was supposed to go to civilians, whose fuel was stolen by Hamas. Immediately, the level of rocket attacks was increased against Israel, because Hamas simply confiscated that fuel for the war effort, and nothing has changed. It did not go to the hospitals. The children in this hospital still had to be evacuated, and normal function was not resumed, because Hamas quite simply lies to the population. It did not inform everyone that it killed civilians in Israel. It claimed that Israel killed its own civilians, and it also lied to them and said that this is already happening because Israel just decided to invade Gaza out of the blue, and that they are defending Gaza from these foreign invaders. And according to the poll, 74% of the civilian population in Gaza want Israel to be destroyed as a state. Many of them don't like Hamas. They find it corrupt. It's mismanaging the situation economically. It's cruel to them, but they hate Israel more. So this situation is by no means a victory for Israel. It's nothing to celebrate because Israel is not getting all of its people back, and it's being seen as an equal exchange instead of an unconditional release of people abducted by a terrorist organization. So it is giving Hamas a level of legitimacy, not only for its own people but in the international community. And yes, people are asking, well, what's it all about if this is what they could have done a month ago? The problem is they couldn't, because Hamas would not agree to anything remotely reasonable. They were asking for impossible things. And second, it's not, there's Israel is facing a lot of pressure from the families, from the United States, from the international community, and it's trying to get these innocent people as quickly as possible to prevent them from getting killed during the course of operation, while also pursuing the defense of its security, the defense of its borders. It's an extremely complicated situation, and while I think it's uh, having saving lives is extremely important, and it should be absolutely pursued in any reasonable manner. We should not be celebrating Hamas. It's not doing anything heroic. That it shouldn't have happened to begin with. There shouldn't have been any people to release, because it shouldn't be abducting people off the streets at all.
Right, right, Irina. Let's look at it from 3 points of view. One is that, Israel, if I understand, military personnel will not be released. So in a staggered manner, whatever the terms of agreement is, some things will happen. Hostages will get released from both sides. Some prisoners from the Palestinian prisoners from the Israeli side, they'll be released, and hostages will release in a staggered manner, if I understand. But no military personnel. So who gets what here in terms of what does
Correct.
Hamas get apart? What does Israel get after this? And what does the world get out after this? Can they, all the international players who have been speaking about it, US, Europe, and other players also, what do they get? Can the world, these people rest easy and get back to their work? Can people like me, or a lot like me
Well,
in this
Israel
part of
is
the
getting
world, what do we understand of this? Can we think one crisis is over, or will it be again back to the same things after all these hostages are released? Because military personnel will still be under, being hostage.
Well, first of all, Israel is only getting about 53 women and children back, and they are not getting all these people back at the same time. It's supposed to come in phases, and Hamas has a history of lying and playing games. So I wouldn't hold my breath for things to work out exactly as they arranged at the moment, because they've come close to agreements previously, and then nothing happened. So I'm not really sure that it will work out the way it's predicted. I hope that it will, but we don't know until it actually happens. And between the exchange is supposed to start on Thursday, so there's a whole day for something to go terribly wrong, either intentionally or by accident. The other issue that's of grave concern is Qatar's role in all of this. They're the main funder, one of the main funders of Hamas. They could have led to this exact results a month ago, a few days after the operation. In the beginning, they could have just said Hamas to release all these people, because Israel is not going to stop. But they played along, and as a result, all these people were suffering, and several people that we know of got killed in the process, and their bodies were found. So they are getting credit completely undeservedly for this operation that they prolonged without using the leverage that they could have, and literally playing with Hamas games. So So no, this is not over. The negotiations over the military personnel will continue even if this exchange is actually successful. Though the prisoners that Israel is releasing will probably go back to the field, and they will probably be assisting Hamas in the operations in attacking Israel. Hamas even now is trying to infiltrate different points in Israel and to exploit border security issues. So they're not actually stopping, and they've actually said on record that they will try, if they have an opportunity, they will try to do the same thing again. And Israel also has no reason to stop military operations. It just wants to get its innocent citizens back. And if it means releasing some of the less dangerous prisoners by comparison, so be it, and giving a short pause, because it probably at the end of the day not change all that much in the grand scheme of things. Um, but at the, but it's not going to solve any of the long-term security problems. Hamas still needs to be destroyed. It's as a military and a political organization, it is still extremely dangerous, and it continues fighting. It has not stopped firing, it has not stopped exploiting. And by the way, just because there is a ceasefire with Hamas doesn't mean that there is a ceasefire with Hezbollah, which has been ramping up its operations, or the Houthis that just hijacked uh, a ship, or for that matter with Iraqi and Syrian militias who are continuing to attack US troops in the region. So there's no ceasefire with any of those groups. So the war is not anywhere over.
Right, right, Irina. Let's move on from this, from the Gaza war to the Ukraine Russia war. What is happening there? What because lots of reports are there. It will that US will not be provide able more aid to Ukraine, and Ukraine. There are reports that Ukraine has gained some ground. Help us understand what exactly is happening in this war in another region.
So far, there's reports that Ukraine aid will resume once the Republicans settle on a final budget towards the end of the year, which they have to. They need to come up with the budget for the next year or go into shutdown. The same. There's also an issue with aid to Israel, which has been conditioned on the budget cuts from the U.S. tax agency, the IRS, and the Republicans are facing increasing discontent over that. The Israelis need weapons. They need to recharge their and other of their defense systems. So this has been a growing problem. So far, US is still providing both Ukraine and Israel with those weapons that have been in the pipeline and whatever. And the US, of course, has put the aid that it's expecting to share as close as possible to delivery points near Ukraine. So the moment it's approved, it is good to go. The issue is not with the old aid that has been previously approved, but with new packages. And the US is pushing for additional new packages, including $100 million package for Ukraine. Meanwhile, on the ground, Russia's for the past 2 weeks has focused its combat effort on Bakhmut, which is not all that strategically important, but it seems to be a psychological point for Russia. And Ukraine has changed its strategy. Its counteroffensive is ramping up speed because there is a concern that the winter weather will make it very difficult to move forward. So it's looking to recapture as much territory as it can, and has made progress to the tune of 42 miles in just a few days, which is a big improvement over the previous issues. It is breaking through Russian defenses, and it has destroyed a lot of Russian weapons with HIMARS, with the American weapons, which it has received relatively recently compared to the rest of the counteroffensive in the preceding war. So this is not surprising. The more advanced weapons they receive, the easier it will be to fight back. Russia has been scrambling to buy back old equipment from countries like Egypt and others, which it has sold to them in previous years. Now it's running out of weapons. So it's facing logistical difficulties.
Right, right. So let's keep on watching these two wars. One is the Middle East, and one is the in Russia and Ukraine war. Let's move on from here to the U.S. Biden, he had been meeting a lot of people, including including Xi Jinping and South Korea and Japan. So help us understand what is happening there. What does this meeting with all these top leaders, especially from the Indo-Pacific region, what does all this all mean?
Well, the biggest issue for Biden was to try to settle things down with China. Um, and the general goal of this trifecta of summits with Asian leaders was to move some sort of a economic and security agreement forward. So far with China, that has been quite disappointing. Many people have criticized Biden for handing over a military victory to China by unilaterally proposing um, this AI related limitation on forces and so on, and nuclear, and excluding AI from nuclear weapons development. China is very reluctant to enter such an agreement. So far, it only has agreed to continue talking about this issue, which is not surprising because, first of all, it has not been brought up previously. Second, there is an issue of trust, and there's also an issue that you can't really check the other countries' progress in that whether they're actually abiding by their commitment. So it's not really advantageous to China to commit to something like that. They can play this to appear conciliatory in agreeing to continue the discussions, but they will not necessarily agree to it at the end of the day. They've agreed to discuss an issue related to fentanyl because China is a main exporter of fentanyl through the Mexican cartels into the US. But again, what leverage does US have to check whether China is actually abiding by its commitments? If the results are negative, China can always say that they tried but they're failing and that some things are just out of their control or that they're coming from some other direction. So I don't really see how such things are enforceable. In terms of economic cooperation, there's been minor developments, but they're mostly advantageous to China. It has not committed to stopping the harassment of American companies. It certainly has not committed to any major geopolitical breakthroughs concerning. It hasn't changed its position on Taiwan or the Indo-Pacific. In fact, very close to the day of the summit, it basically attacked the Philippines over territorial claims. It's looking to make headway into towards Indonesia and elsewhere, and this is all not a very good situation, to put it mildly. And U.S. actually reiterated its commitment to a one China policy, which in my opinion was a mistake to even word it that way, even if that's what the policy is, because that sort of language does not bring confidence to Taiwan. And actually, a recent poll showed that 7 in 10 Taiwanese do not trust the United States. So U.S. is not gaining anything from that sort of rhetoric. China has not suddenly decided to become best friends, and Taiwan now is losing trust. U.S. needs to figure out what its position actually is and realize that these policies are they're not mutually compatible. Either it's going to recognize Taiwan and fully back it, or it has to give up completely. But then it will realize that it will have a cost in its international standing. If it wants to continue doing business with China, it will never be able to do that as an equal partner, because China simply does not view anybody as an equal partner, including the United States. So that's simply a philosophical recognition of reality that US has to come to accept. Regarding South Korea and Japan, it has been somewhat of a downer because the main point of those meetings were economic, and no major breakthroughs for the US came out of them. And I think there's a lot of distractions concerning security measures. Right now, North Korea just notified Japan about the launch of its new spy satellite, unclear whether it was successful or not. Two previous attempts failed, but it's also not a great development because North Korea is becoming more active again, and nobody wants to see that. There's also an election coming up in Taiwan. The current administration is seeking to return. They're much more aggressive, although the vice president has strategically refrained from pushing for complete open independence. Their opponents are much more conciliatory towards China, and they're looking to restart a dialogue with China. So it's not clear who will win. It looks like it might be the return of the incumbent administration because the mood in Taiwan is not particularly open to China. But we don't know. China is looking to avoid direct aggression. It's in their interest to back the opposition in Taiwan and to get what they want to get through peaceful and political rather than military means if possible. So I would not rule out some sort of a political meddling in the upcoming elections either.
Right. Right, Irina. And one more thing, why did Biden have to call the Chinese leadership a dictator? Because it happened several times, and if it was a slip of tongue, then it could be. So is there a diplomatic sort of a thing that they want to achieve? Is there a different sort of a message that the US leadership want to pass? This cannot be a slip of tongue if it's happening again and again. Help us understand this part, especially when you have a leadership coming to your place and you are trying to look at much more closer relationship between the two nations. How does this work? I want to understand this sort of diplomacy for a lot of people who are not diplomats, general people, but who thought that there will be a much more cohesion between the two countries.
I think that's meant to send a message of strength and the fact that the US is realistic about who they're dealing with, especially compromising on main points of security interest to the US. Um, it has purged its own ranks. It has repeatedly did very odd things with its senior officials, foreign minister, defense minister. It's just been acting very erratically from the US perspective. And all of that seems to be subsumed to the whim of the one leader who seems to be not listening to any criticism and how these actions are seen as destabilizing, not just by the US but by the international community. It does not bode well when you have sudden changes in the cabinet for no reason, when people go missing for weeks at a time, and the explanations for all of that are very unclear. So I think this message was to send the fact that the US is not being naive, especially since China is refusing to make any real serious concessions on any major issues to reevaluate its behavior. It will be treated as an authoritarian regime that is not following the will of its people or any sort of popular consensus or democratic norms. We're dealing with one guy who is calling the shots, and it is what it is.
Right, right. Let's move on from there to Bahrain, the Manama dialogue. What do we understand of this? It just concluded there. What are the gains or what are the challenges? What did we get out of this for the world?
Well, normally the purpose of the Manama dialogue was to bring Israelis, Palestinians, and the Middle East community under the economic umbrella, to integrate them through economic and social rather than political means, and to move away from the politicization of the Palestinian issues. But this dialogue came at a time of war. There's no avoiding politics. There's no getting around it. And the big breaking news from the summit was when the Bahraini crown prince essentially condemned Hamas while also calling and pushing for this hostage situation to be resolved by the means that we are seeing them being resolved as we speak. So he seemed to be on board with this plan that we're discussing. And he also made a very clear position of Bahrain regarding Hamas, and not for the first time. Previously, Bahrain issued both its own individual statement and a joint statement with the US, condemning Hamas's actions and calling them barbaric and terrorist. And there was a backlash from Hamas, which essentially insulted them and called them Arab scum. And right now, it's a very clear message, which is divergent from the entire uh, Arab and Muslim community in many respects. I would say the closest to that is Egypt, which has avoided directly naming Israel in most recent comments by its minister. It has described the situation and the impact it hopes to achieve and the results it is looking for, but it has refrained from individually attacking Israel by name. So Bahrain is very much in that same line, and that is lies in sharp contrast with many of the other GCC and Middle Eastern and otherwise Islamic governments which have been repeatedly attacking Israel, calling not just for this temporary ceasefire or hostage exchange, but for a complete end of the war, and have now collectively have gone to employ China at the BRICS summit in South Africa specifically for that purpose. There've also been calls for embargo um, for an end to arms at that BRICS summit and so forth. That is actually a meaningless comment because Israel does not import weapons from most of the international community. Mostly, it gets its weapons from the United States, several European countries that are close allies and are not likely to listen to that sort of rhetoric to begin with. So it was a kind of a Middle Eastern virtue signaling to say to express symbolic outrage without having to actually do anything that would harm their own interests. That's what we're seeing. So Bahrain took a very clear moral position, and I think that will send a message where it stands, particularly to the United States, not just to Israel and to other countries. I think Bahrain is very much aligning itself with the Western camp in that regard, and I think that will be duly noted.
Right, right, Irina. A lot of talk, a lot of meetings over Middle East crisis. A lot of talk also happened on Ukraine, still happening, but on the Sudan conflict, everyone, the international community is silent. 800 Sudanese civilians butchered. Why is it so? What is happening in Sudan? For a person outside, who want to understand why all this killing, who are the bad guys, who are the good guys, where do they want to go with whatever they are doing?
Unfortunately, there are no real good guys in Sudan war other than the civilians who are being butchered, because what we're seeing is a war between um, two generals, one from the secular but very bloodthirsty Janjaweed, the rapid support forces that were introduced as a militia to take care of the government's dirty work in the past, and they're efficient, they're good at what they do, better than the military, but they are also completely ruthless and immoral. And they work with Wagner, they work with several other, with UE and Haftar for reasons of very of just one issue interest by those countries. They're completely pragmatic considerations. These are not real full-fledged alliances. SAF, the government military, is has included a lot of the old Bashir Islamist bodies, even though it did not start out that way. The whole point of the coup, the revolution, the uprising was to put an end to Bashir and his complete overreach and human rights abuses. They're not respectful of human rights either. Um, these two groups are divided by territorial and tribal loyalties. There's also the resentment from the Western Sudanese Darfur region, Arab militias and other groups comprising the RSF loyalists, at the fact that they've been used for years by the Eastern military, and they have just now they're looking to gain power, and they're actually moving forward rather quickly, not as quickly as one would hope. It will take some time, but they are making gains surprisingly. The army has superior means. They have more backing, more funding, somewhat more international legitimacy, and they have better weapons. But RSF has just better fighters who have more experience in Libya, in Yemen, and other places, and they've got a flow of mercenaries and assorted foreign fighters from Chad and other nearby countries. So this is just it's it's going in that direction. Where it will end is unclear. Probably not anytime soon, because both parties are being funded and they're being backed by various different states. But in the meantime, it's created a huge humanitarian disaster. There are people literally starving there. Uh, there's been a displacement of 10 million Sudanese civilians. Humanitarian aid is not reaching people. There's also skirmishes with South Sudan over disputed um, territories and oil. So it's a complete mess. But it's does not so far have a much wider regional or international impact compared to, for instance, Israel Gaza war or Ukraine and Russia. They don't have major economic or international investments or influences. For that reason, it's just simply taking a back burner compared to those two other conflicts that just have more stakeholders who are more active and are more interested, and there's more impact of military impact, trade impact, economic impact, social impact from, and more money for campaigns and media, and more people directly affected um, internationally. So unfortunately, it's being ignored. There's no real policy by anybody. In the US, there's also no real uh, policy because there's just not enough resources, and um, pressuring the other geopolitical actors who are fueling the conflict with the additional weapons and provisions could backfire, because then those actors will not be cooperative in other matters that are higher priority for the US. So we are seeing a very tragic situation, unfortunately, that is, that we are distracted from. It's not getting enough coverage. It's not getting enough support. It's not, and it's no less tragic than what's happening in Gaza. There are more people affected. Actually, significantly more. It's 45 million people in a very vast territory, but because of the way things are, people are just not that interested.
Right, right. Very unfortunate. Hope these sort of things get equal attention and this gets sorted. This is not good from any way you see it. Any conflict is, in my personal opinion, I don't really like to see any bloodbath happening. But then that is all a utopian idea. Let's move away from the utopian idea to the real ground world, and there it is. Former Russian General Sviridov, been found dead. Mysterious circumstances along with a lady. I don't know, people call that it was his wife. I am not sure. You'll be able to tell why this killing, why not, why now, what is happening, what is this all about? Anyone, he was, see, he I guess criticized Russian President Putin some time back. So is it related to
Yes,
that? That's not where it is mentioned. Help us understand this.
yes, he has been critical of Russia's strategy in Ukraine. He basically regards this whole idea and the way it was executed as a complete failure. Not because he's such a humanitarian, but he just doesn't believe it was well executed or thought out, and he thought it was a complete disaster for the Russian military forces. And the payback came in time. He was first removed from power, but it was not sufficient. We have seen dozens and dozens of mysterious deaths of close Putin associates and former friends and allies, including some who have been critical of at various points in time of the decision making process regarding the war in Ukraine, and a variety of people ranging from doctors in provinces to uh, Lukoil and other energy executives to generals and the military personnel ended up meeting their deaths in a way that clearly indicates untimely demise, not from natural causes. So it's very clearly an intimidation tactic and a purge by Putin and his close associates to prevent any sort of criticism or disagreement with his action. And of course, the downside of that, besides apparent obvious ruthless authoritarianism, is that anyone who is professional and who can give good advice, it gets removed permanently, and therefore um, Putin and his close crew end up being surrounded by um, yes men who are only capable of supporting whatever crazy idea that comes to their heads, and that does not bode well for the success of anything, of any endeavors. From that side, it never works well. This is what Stalin used to do. It ended up bringing him into World War II, because he disregarded intelligence, and then he disregarded advice from many people, and it ends up, when the more authoritarian somebody is, the less inclined they are to listen to criticism. They see it as a form of disloyalty and betrayal. They become paranoid that any sort of positive response to criticism could make them look weak, and they end up ultimately shooting themselves in the foot, which is, I think, very much the direction Russia is going to right now.
Right, right. Thank you for your perspective on that, Irina. Now let's move on to this 57 attacks on US forces in Iraq and Syria by Iran forces. What does this mean? With little response, is US now becoming much more non-violent or something? Help us understand why these attacks and why the US, with little response.
Well, it's actually been already over 60 attacks between October 7th and now, and there's been over, um, over 100 and 100 plus this year. Aside from that, but this period has been very intense. Finally, and there's been many injuries and even deaths among US personnel. Finally, after the latest attack today, US finally responded with a deadly blow to some of the Iran-backed groups. Whether that will finally put an end to these attacks remains to be seen. But there has been actually a very polarized response within the Biden administration as to what to do. Earlier, a number of these entities have been put on the sanctions list. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what that does, because most of them will never travel to the United States, and I doubt that they have assets either in the US or in any Western country. They probably all their money is probably in some non-Western banking systems. So I don't know whether sanctioning them is anything more than a symbolic response, but there's been a great deal of internal disagreement over whether to respond and risk escalation, and also what kind of a signal that will send to Iran, because US is still trying to pursue some sort of an agreement. I'm not entirely sure about what at this point. But others believed that we need some level of deterrence, because otherwise it will just keep happening. So finally, after this latest and very brazen attack, I think that faction won out, and we will see if there's going to be, if that will put an end to things, because up until now the only responses were attacks on empty warehouses in Syria, which certainly didn't do anything either in Syria or in Iraq. It did not prevent further escalation.
Right, right. Let's look at the US-China relationship now from the business perspective. Also, China has received US equipment to make chips despite restrictions, and so what does that mean for the semiconductor wars? And also, when we are talking of China's plans for navy base in Oman, that has come out. So what does that mean in terms of geopolitics, navigation in the Middle East? Let's touch these two topics here.
Well, uh, China has been making breakthroughs with the chip production domestically, not as quickly as it could with the full cooperation, but it has personnel that's trained in that production. It has the elements, the raw materials necessary for production. It has stolen a great deal of technology, and has previously cooperated with other countries until it was frozen out. And by the way, these restrictions were not 100% complete, and they were also gradual, so none of that came at the same time. Now we are seeing that some countries are essentially circumventing sanctions and providing China with what it needs to continue the production. And it's been making some progress. It still needs some of the most advanced know-how. I think it's trying to infiltrate the industries outside its own borders where that is possible. But for now, it will take whatever it can get and try to use it against the West. And I think that's why US and other partners should be much more aggressive in ensuring that none of this equipment makes its way to China, and penalizing companies or individuals who are involved in this sort of smuggling. When it comes to the base, astonishingly enough, China has already completed the agreement towards the building of that base in Oman, which puts it in a very sensitive position with respect to Red Sea security, the strategically important Strait of Hormuz, where one-fifth of international oil and gas trade passes, and Bab el Mandeb, another sensitive area, which is a very narrow strait where Houthis have been abducting and attacking ships. So having China with this access to the Middle East, right where the U.S. base is located, right where many international Western navies have put their forces, is creating a very explosive, problematic situation. The fact that the U.S. has only been informed about it recently and have taken no action to disrupt this process by putting pressure on Oman to prevent them from this agreement, it does not speak well for the U.S. Political will, or whatever caused this process to happen. Previously, when China was planning a second military naval base in Africa after Djibouti, U.S. was able to disrupt this process by putting pressure on the relevant countries. The fact that they were not able or willing to do so in this case shows that the U.S. Political influence in the Middle East is waning, and we are facing a very dangerous situation.
Right, right. Let's move on to India once again about this diplomat report. Mysterious death of accused Khalistani extremist. So it's talked about an assassination, allegedly an assassination, program. How do you see that? What is this report about? Why do they think India will have some sort of a program like this? What is your understanding of this whole report?
Well, the report talks about a number of Khalistani terrorists around the world, not just the guy who met his end in Canada and caused this whole uproar between India and Canada, but apparently a number of such people from these networks have been found dead under strange circumstances in other countries, which presumes that they didn't all die coincidentally of natural causes, that they haven't all contracted some pandemic, but that somebody has been killing them, and who would have an interest in their deaths if not India? It's a logical conclusion, and it's also logical to conclude that most intelligence agencies around the world may or may not have a formal assassination program, but they certainly willing to take actions when they feel that when there's a cause for it, that there is some sort of a security issue and somebody needs to be eliminated. So I don't know whether India has a formal program of that sort or not. I do think that they may find it in their interest to go after people who cause them problems if the countries in question are not willing to cooperate um, uh, uh, in basically deporting them by legal means, or going through other legal forms of cooperation to put anyone involved in extremism on trial. So on the one hand, that expedites the problem, and uh, uh, you don't have to deal with decades of hearings in Canada or wherever. On the other hand, country that can cause additional conflicts over sovereignty issues. It's certainly you certainly don't want to end up in a situation where that's just a norm to assassinate anyone suspected of extremism, because frankly you could get the wrong person. Somebody the somebody could uh, be mistaken. Somebody could be set up or framed by their colleagues and not actually be presenting a danger. And it could also invite reciprocal assassinations of your own personnel by the other side or by some other third party. So that's obviously not an ideal scenario. But let's zoom out from whether or not these people are actually being assassinated and by India or by some guns for hire or whoever. And let's look what's actually going on. What's actually going on is that the situation with Khalistan and extremism has been spiraling out of control for years. Conventional means of dealing with it internally have apparently failed, because a lot of the masterminds do seem to reside, just like Hamas operatives who are calling the shot in Gaza have reside outside Gaza. They reside in Turkey and Qatar. And what did Prime Minister Netanyahu say at a recent hearing? In my opinion, he shouldn't have said it out loud, but his position was clear that anyone who resides anywhere and is connected to Hamas will be eliminated, whether they're in Qatar or somewhere else. So this is a prime minister of a country openly acknowledging their course of action once they have decided that Hamas needs to be eliminated as an organization. And if India is taking a similar position regarding Khalistan and considers that particular network of operatives of comparable threat as what Hamas presents to Israel, can people really blame them if they meet the same type of end? Now, whether or not Palestine is comparable to Hamas is another discussion. I think it is a worthy discussion, understanding who they are, how they operate, and whether they can be reasoned with by any other means. But in theory, if they are in fact comparable to Hamas and they end up getting killed in the process, and other countries do nothing to put an end to the activity and harbor them, knowing that they are planning operations in India, I really think we can't blame India too much if they do undertake such action, any more than anyone can blame Israel if they do go after terrorists somewhere else.
Absolutely. One more thing, I wanted to understand, curious to understand, is there was already a war of words between India and Canada over the allegations that they made earlier on. So why? And then they
Mhm.
quoted the five, and that they have. So why have they not come out with more, so-called evidence again in the other cases? Did diplomat mention anything about any other evidence that they have that these people may have had, if they are alleging or this sort of a story is coming out in the open?
Quite simply, this is an embarrassing situation for everybody. I think if they did have evidence, even if they did have such evidence, I think it's customary not to reveal that, depending on what methods were used to detect what happened. So that could be one reason why they're not doing it. Another reason is that they simply don't want the situation to get out of hand even more than they do. Thirdly, they may have evidence, but it's not complete. They may have something that could be completed by other means. They could have other reasons in consideration that are political in nature. All of that could be true, but the bottom line remains the same. Why was Canada giving asylum to such people in the first place? And also, why hasn't there been yet a scheduled discussion about how to go forward in um, addressing potential security claims and concerns by India? After all, these Khalistani extremists have been responsible for acts of aggression inside Canada against Canadian citizens as well. So there is actually a point of common ground that I think should be room for fruitful dialogue rather than a breakdown in diplomatic relations. I think it's an opportunity, personally, to avoid problems.
Absolutely, absolutely. There are a lot of questions like earlier on. Let's see what this all means. As of now, I understand that that India is a very peaceful nation, and in terms of diplomacy, also we always try to maintain good relations with everyone. But then, as I said, we do not know how governments operate. But then governments can also look at the wider aspects of sovereignty, and if other countries are harboring this. But it's a curious thing. I would like to read that report myself, after learning from you, Irina. So let's move on to that, from that war of words between India and Canada to the war of words between Netanyahu and Turkey. So what is this all about? Where is this going? Will this lead to break in diplomatic relations between these two countries? Why are they fighting?
Well, Erdogan has escalated his rhetoric. He's sending a flotilla of 1,000 boats, allegedly with humanitarian aid to Gaza. But we have seen that the last time he did that in 2010, it was not a humanitarian but a military operation that has ended with a brutal attack on Israeli naval officers who were inspecting those boats for weapons, and it led to a complete breakdown in relations between the countries for 12 years, which were only recently resumed, and now we're back to the same situation. Um, Erdogan repeatedly not only refused to condemn Hamas for anything that happened, but he attacked Israel as a terrorist state, which led to Netanyahu's response. He also is threatening to break diplomatic relations altogether, and both countries recalled each other's respective ambassadors already. So these relations have been downgraded, but not yet completely uh, uh, depleted. And for Turkey, on the one hand, they don't want to lose the economic and tourist advantage from Israel, but on the other hand, for Erdogan, it's a great opportunity to rile up not only his base, but to put himself out as a leader of Islamists around the entire Muslim world. And he is in competition with the Arab states over this matter. So for him, it's a point of pride, even if it has economic downturns. And Israel's economy right now is suffering greatly from the war anyway, so Turkey may find that this point is the best time to do so if they are going to do exactly that. We are seeing that South Africa has very much moved in the direction with the parliament voting to shut down the Israeli embassy altogether. So Turkey may see that that the momentum is in that direction, and it will not be seen as anything particularly radical should they do the same and satisfy this street fire that's ongoing, and to put pressure on Israel in this particular way.
Right,
And there
right,
has been
Irina.
no pushback, by the way, from the West against this rhetoric, so there are no consequences as well.
Right, right, Irina. So let's now talk about something happening in Spain there, in terms of the whole Catalonian movement there. We have seen a lot of talk about this, Catalonian movement and Spain and all that, and suddenly now we read about this Spanish Prime Minister and ruling parties engage in dialogue with separatist leaders in Brussels. So is it going to be a solution for this long difficult moment for both the sides? How do we look at it? Even though a Spanish judge is looking, investigating some of these people for terrorism, how does this look like a solution, or after a long time?
It looks actually really bad for the ruling parties, because the ruling parties in Spain are quite socialist, they're quite radical, and they've been losing political ground with the right wing parties increasingly gaining seats in the parliament. So they are expecting a complete defeat in the next elections, and in order to avoid it, they're putting aside all principles, all the high-minded rhetoric about sovereignty that led to the expulsion of the Puigdemont, the separatist leader, who has been taking money from the Russians for this activity. There's been very scandals involving Russian intelligence agencies and so public information not in dispute. They are not only went to Brussels to negotiate with him and to bring his party and have them after their separatist, claims, ironically, join the government, but they're willing to consider full amnesty to him and his associates after all these spy scandals and all these attacks on Spanish government and intelligence by these people accusing them of spyware abuses and so forth. So essentially, everybody, these people who have been pushing these separatists have won. They've achieved completely victory due to the weakness and corruption of these parties, who, in order to stay in power, are willing to sacrifice all these security and sovereignty concerns. So it looks really bad, and there have been mass demonstrations in Spain against this, but they've been uh, underreported. Among all the coverage of the pro-Hamas rallies, these internal domestic matters, which have caused mass, just complete shock among the population, they have been not reported at all.
Right, right. Now let's we have already discussed quite a lot of issues, across the world. Irina, one more issue is now, Osama bin Laden seems to have come back to life with a lot of love for Osama bin Laden on TikTok. What is this whole idea of thing about what video has been banned? We can't watch that video here in India. TikTok is banned here since 2020. So tell us about this. Why there is suddenly a lot of talk about TikTok and Osama bin Laden?
Well, I don't personally believe in coincidences. As you know, TikTok is produced by a company that has links to the Chinese government. It's been used as a weapon against the West in many ways: propaganda, targeting, biometrics, keystrokes, pushing stupid challenges that cause addiction and harm among children and teenagers. Um, but this particular um, incident that involved the sudden release of Osama bin Laden's letter, which attacked the West and which became popular among young people who have no idea who he even is or what really happened, who were born or grew up after 9/11, and who are completely ignorant and easily manipulated. I believe this was a targeted attack designed to achieve this particular impact among influencers. And of course, once the damage was done, TikTok banned that particular video, but the damage was done, and now that's all anyone is talking about it. And besides that particular video, there's a lot of other propaganda circulating, and supposedly TikTok is fighting it, but it's already too late. And mainstream media in China is also spreading pro-Hamas and anti-Semitic content and attacking the United States day and night. Supposedly they toned it down for the summit in the US, but the main point is still there.
Right. So does that just mean it will strengthen the case for banning TikTok in the US?
Sorry, what?
Yes, Irina, if you yeah. So does this mean that this will
Mhm.
strengthen the case for TikTok getting banned in the US? Because this is something a
I
lot of people may not want to see.
Well, 100 million Americans have downloaded TikTok, but honestly, I think people are it's being used as a weapon, and the same type of content is not available inside China. So clearly, it's aimed at Western countries, aimed at manipulation, and it's clearly a tool. I think there are plenty of American and other companies that can fill in the gap if TikTok were ceased to exist, and I think we'd be all be better off if that happened. That's my personal opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is a lot of happening in the world. That is a lot of things that we covered, and we will come back again. Again in the next 2 weeks to bring more about what has happened in the world. You will be able to help us understand all those things, analyze all those things, and bring it to the world for us, in the world, according to Irina Tsukerman. Thank you so much indeed for joining us in this episode.
Thank you. Thank you so much.